Thomas Ziegler. It's coming from Cologne in Germany, and I quickly switch to Italian to present a little bit of his life and biography. Thomas è curatore del Dipartimento Acquari e Rettili dello Zoo di Colonia, in Germania ovviamente, dal 2003. È coordinatore di vari progetti di ricerca sulla biodiversità e conservazione della natura dello Zoo di Colonia, in Vietnam e in Laos. Ha studiato biologia all'Università di Bonn in Germania e ha ottenuto il diploma e la tesi di dottorato presso il famoso Museo Alexander Koenig di Bonn, con attenzione alla sistematica zoologica e alle diversità di anfibi e rettili. Si occupa di ricerca e di conservazione della diversità erpetologica in Vietnam dal 1997. Ha pubblicato più di 500 articoli e libri, occupandosi principalmente della diversità e della conservazione erpetologica. Ha descritto ben 131 specie in qualità di curatore dello zoo e coordinatore del progetto. In generale cerca di combinare approcci in situ e ex situ, come collegare gli aspetti biologici degli zoo con la ricerca e la conservazione della diversità. Questo è quanto. In realtà c'è ancora scritto molto, ma credo che Thomas ci presenterà un'ottima plenary. È molto importante perché lui lavora appunto allo Zoo di Colonia e questo doppio approccio, cioè zoo, natura, credo che sia una delle chiavi per la conservazione della biodiversità in futuro. Grazie Thomas.
Ja, grazie Franco. Buongiorno tutti. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Franco, I'm very happy that I have been invited to join your Congress. And my presentation today is about the one plan approach. And what you see in here, this is the aquarium of the Cologne Zoo. And we both had birthday last year. We got 50 years. And we have developed from a pure show to a conservation center. And this is my presentation about. And what you see in here, these are already critically endangered species where we run breeding projects and are both also committed in nature for these species. That's the Vietnamese crocodile newt, the Burmese star tortoise, the Philippine crocodile, and the Vietnamese crocodile lizard. And they all will appear again during the frame of the presentation. Yeah, that was 50 years ago. So it was a pure show of exotic animals because the people in Cologne requested that. And here the terrarium section, the aquarium with the riverine panorama, and the insectarium also with museal elements. And that has substantially changed in the past decades. This is how the house is looking today, with the entrance area with the aquarium, the terrarium with the Philippine crocodile enclosure, and here the insectarium. And this is a poster right in the beginning, which shows our visitors, our major focus, which is here from animal show to conservation center. And before I start with herpetology, please allow me to show two slides also dealing with the insectarium and the aquarium. Also in here, we have already started to go for conservation. Even with invertebrates, we run projects for 10 threatened taxa, which you can see some of them in here. This is the Bertia cambodgiensis snail, which is critically endangered from southern Vietnam and Cambodia, and another snail from the Seychelles, a millipede from the Seychelles, where we participate conservation breeding programs to build up ex situ buffer reserve population. And this is quite an important project. This is the Desertas wolf spider from the island Deserta Grande nearby Madeira, which is also critically endangered. And this spider is only living in an area which covers only 3 kilometers in length and a few 100 meters in width. and it's threatened by an invasive grass. So that means in situ protection is not enough. And so we participate the conservation breeding program. And my keepers in the insectarium so far have bred more than 2,000 spiders, which have been sent to 9 other zoos in Europe to extend the conservation breeding network. Quite important term. I come back to that later in the presentation. In the aquarium, we have built up a focal point threatened freshwater fishes from Madagascar. We keep 10 species of freshwater fish that are threatened and breed meanwhile 7 of them and extend the conservation breeding network in Europe. And this is also reflected in our signboards. In every title you find conservation together, last minute. And also the red buttons of the IUCN red list status to show that our visitors, and also such a green circle with only 1, 2, or 3 sentences and not telling that this is a beautiful species, a venomous or something like that. No, it's why we go for that species and which is our role in the conservation program. And these are some of the threatened species from Madagascar. This is once believed one of the rarest freshwater fish species in the world, which we have bred meanwhile in hundreds and provided them to other zoos in Europe. That was the starting point for me to go for Madagascar. So I'm originally, since 25 years, working in Vietnam. And when Franco and Angelica Crotini, Franco Andrione, have been in Cologne at the occasion of the Madagascar Fauna and Flora Group meeting a few years ago. Yes, Angelica, Franco had to leave earlier that day. So that was the starting point also to go for Madagascar, and that was the build-up of our freshwater fish projects. So that means if you want to go for conservation, that can be done quite quickly. In case you want, you can do. And this now, coming to the main topic of this presentation, hapitology. This is my hapitology department. In total, we keep more than 100 threatened species in the Cologne Zoo Aquarium in total, so also fishes and invertebrates. And now I'm going to talk about the herbs only. And these are all critically endangered species. Not all, only some of them. Threatened monitor lizards, Varanus micheli. This is Goneurosaurus, the tiger gecko, just recently described and only occurring in one small forest area in Vietnam. The Burmese star tortoise and the Philippine crocodile. And this is a little bit of statistics. Alone in the terrarium section, we keep around 100 species of amphibians and reptiles. And currently, we breed half of them. So that's not the statistics going back 10 or 20 years. So it's that what we are actually doing. And 1/4 of them from confiscations. So 24 amphibians and reptiles we have received from the authorities in the US or elsewhere. Confiscated animals are killed. We don't want to go that way. We help our authorities. We take them over, cocker them up, and in the best case can build up conservation breeding programs. Very important point. I come back to that later. And 1/3 of the 100 amphibian reptiles are threatened, and 1/4 listed on the appendices of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES. Yeah, and again, also in the terrarium section, you find everywhere the IUCN red list button, so people see directly that's not for fun. So this is serious background, what we are doing in there. Coming to the one plan approach, maybe you all know already what that is. In case not, I will explain that. This is a term the captive breeding specialist group of the IUCN has created lastly. In fact, we do that already since longer time, but this is a quite modern and very nice term, and it's absolutely important. And we also go for a species which is living in front of the Cologne Zoo, which is the green toad, Photis viridis. And here the local population is in decline. And the local conservationists have asked us, hey, Cologne Zoo people, can you help? This species is going to be lost in Cologne. We need your help. So it's funny. Many people say zoos are bullshit, but in this case, the conservationists are approaching the zoos for their help. And that's important. And this is a cool one plane approach project, which now has also an own show. That means conservation can also be very cool show, but has a serious background. And in this case, we are supported by the Cologne drainage company who has funded that project. Here we take over the tadpoles from nature, we rear them, and at the end of the season, we release them back to nature. So the ex situ component of the one plane approach, what is happening in zoos or stations, is breeding or rearing to increase the N. Because in nature, the population is in decline. Here we have the tadpoles, the froglets, and here further rearing facilities behind the scenes. And in nature, we are going to take care for the existing habitats, and we create new habitats, so-called stepstone habitats, that the few existing ones are better connected. This is the in situ aspect. That means if in situ and ex situ comes together, so that's the one plane approach, all for conservation. The meta-population, both in the field and also in the zoo. And this is the release action at the end of the year. These are colleagues from our conservation authority in Cologne, from the biostation. So it's very nice, all coming together from different institutions for the optimum conservation of a species. And last year, we could release 1,500 froglets, which all have been died in the field because of climate change, because their ponds having been dried out. So quite important project. And that's also the one plane approach, not only in situ and ex situ coming together, also different expertises. In this case with Professor Dr. Miguel Vences, also known from his research in Madagascar, here a genetical study, a microsatellite analysis to check whether there is a genetic bottleneck in the green toad population and what we should do against it. And another publication about parasitology. Is the decline of the green toad in Cologne affected by diseases? So that means we try not only to make a big panel in front of our zoo, we are going for conservation, we are doing this. And we are also doing research for conservation that it is, in the best case to protect the species. This is the area behind. So where we have reared 1,500 larvae in the last year and released, and here the larvae. And finally, we also have received an award for that in 2019 of the UN Decade Biological Diversity. But that's not so important, just to show that we really can reach conservation goals through and with and implemented by zoos. And this is also what the TV wants to see. Not longer these documentations, we have the longest, we have the oldest, we have the most beautiful. No, we go for conservation. And these stories are really interesting for the TV. And that was an extended version of our Green Toad project for the German Breakfast TV, one of the most important channels. And here, a view to our terrarium section. Also in here, we show our goals and our work in Vietnam. And this is the Frogs and Friend computer, or the bar, where we also show movies about our research and conservation work in Vietnam, and of course also that of other zoos, so to inform the visitors not only through the animals we keep and breed, but also through multimedia approaches. And this is the Vietnamese crocodile newt. That's also a very nice story going for the one plan approach. That's a species which only recently has been discovered in Vietnam. And formerly it was the black crocodile newt, thought to be widely occurring in China and Vietnam. And then scientists recognized, oh, this is a group of different taxa which have all micro distributions, yeah? And this, of course, has also consequences for conservation, because if a taxon is only smaller distributed, then maybe or most certainly is higher threatened. That's the Vietnamese crocodile newt, an endangered crocodile newt species from Vietnam. And we also do field work. And this is the in situ aspect. And this is Dr. Pham Thi Quang, a former PhD student in our group, who is working together with my PhD student Marta from Portugal. And they study the population status, the population density, and they also do threat analysis. And by publishing this, we have a chance to bring taxa to the ICN Red List and also to include them on the appendices of CITES, because these publications are really needed, because without them, no one can do any formal action for conservation. So that's quite important. And for example, Marta in her PhD could bring all the threatened species existing on the appendices of CITES in 2019. And this is the actual distribution of the Vietnamese crocodile newt. And we show this also to our visitors, that they understand this is not only an endemic species for Vietnam. No, it's a micro-endemic species only known from 4 regions. And it's very, very quickly that it can be that this species goes extinct. So we must do something, of course, most important in the field, but as a buffer, as a reserve, also ex situ in zoos and station. And we have received from our partner station in Vietnam, I show that later, 4 larvae of the Vietnamese crocodile newt. Only 2 got adult, and we were happy that has been male and female. And my expert team, my keeper team, finally could breed them. So that's a lot of work. Nearly 1 keeper is busy more or less alone with them the whole day. But so far we could breed more than 300 newts, yeah, out of 2 parents. So that's really a nice success. And we already could repatriate newts back to Vietnam. This is my section keeper, Anna Rauers, with my team. Christian is also an artist. He has developed the comic for the green toad you have seen before. And this is when we have sent them back to the Millen station, where the German ambassador welcomes the crocodile newts back to Vietnam. This is our cooperation partner, Professor Dr. Truong Quang Nguyen, with whom we run all the projects in Vietnam. We also have other crocodile newts we are focusing and build up conservation breeding networks. And we have renovated all these former storage rooms in the aquarium into modern conservation breeding facilities. And we do not only send back bred individuals to the home countries. We, of course, I mentioned that already, give them to other zoos to have a stable conservation breeding network. Because if you keep a species only in one zoo, there is a high risk. If there is a fire, a disease, or something else, that all is lost. So we need more. We need a system, a network. And here, since recently, we also include private persons. And this through the organization Citizen Conservation. And here, the private hobbyists have to sign a contract. It's structured, but so we can help to more quickly build up a conservation breeding network, because if a species is extinct, it's too late. But if we have some of them ex situ, we can help in case they should go extinct in the wild. So here, inclusion of private persons through Citizen Conservation. They also have an English homepage. If you are interested in, you can check that later. And we provide all our crocodile newts and also our cichlids from Madagascar to the Citizen Conservation Breeding Network. So we can prevent that species go extinct, at least. Of course, The Ark, in the end, also have go again to land, to go ashore. But this is only a reserve, an additional conservation measure, according to the one plan approach, going for ex situ. Of course, we also have to do and to commit in situ. And where? If you look at this map, of course, in those places which are marked in red, which are those places which have the highest biodiversity and the highest endemic biodiversity. So if the world should burn, we should start there first because the treasure trove is highest in these sites. And there is, of course, Madagascar, and there's also Vietnam. But the problem, if you go to these areas, it's sometimes looking already quite terrible. This picture has been taken by me years ago when landing in Ho Chi Minh City. Yeah? And Franco has said, our group, meanwhile, has discovered more than 130 species of amphibians, reptiles, and mammals in Vietnam. But the question is, where? It's only houses, yeah, until the horizon. There are only very few tiny forest patches left. So it's really high time. The time is now to commit for that now, before it's too late. Unfortunately, this is the case. And so I was quite happy if when the WWF has asked me a few months ago to write a foreword for their Mekong report. It's also quite nice, yeah, that the WWF and zoos are not on two distant pages. No, they have asked me and we work together. So that's quite cool. And this underlines the role of modern proactive zoos and their role in conservation. And I have highlighted that we need to invest more in the young generation, Generation Z, because we need more researchers and more conservationists to fill the gaps, because there are immensely many gaps we have to fill. And I, of course, have highlighted the one plan approach because that's not everywhere known, and it's important to spread that word. Talking about students and the young generation, we invest not only in students from Europe, but also in students in the country of the home range of the species, like here in Vietnam. These are students working with bent-toed geckos, Cyrtodactylus. This is a phylogenetic tree, and all those taxa which are marked in color are new species. So it's enormously much work in front of us just describing diversity, because we can only protect what is known to us. And Heng, meanwhile, is doing her PhD about molecular genetics of Cyrtodactylus in Cologne. And she is working, Tam is working with the Philippine crocodile in Hanoi with the genetics. I come back to that later. And even in zoos, you can do conservation research or research for conservation. This is Marion Schneider, my former PhD student, who did thermoregulation analysis with sun bears, Malayan bears, in Cologne Zoo and other zoos in Germany. And she found out they need primary forest, because in secondary forest, it's too warm for them. They cannot stand that. And that recently has been published in Journal of Thermal Biology. So that means even in zoos, you can do important work which supports conservation in the field. Another point is many people say, oh, you don't need tropical species in zoos. Yeah, please go for species from your home country, but not from the tropics. That's useless. If you do research, you can show the opposite. This is to show how many threatened amphibians zoos in Europe and North America are keeping. And you see, it's not only species from the region, it's also many threatened species from South America, the tropics of Africa, and of Southeast Asia. And if these zoos should be closed, there is no more ex situ project for these species in the other countries. And the problem in the tropical countries, and I know that from Vietnam and also from Madagascar, is that, yeah, most often there is not yet that expertise, there is not yet the money in there, and there are not the stations and the zoos and the institutions. So we first have to help them to build that up. So currently, we need this expertise in these countries to support conservation breeding. And you all know the amphibian crisis and that amphibians are the most threatened taxa, even before birds and mammals, but not yet enough amphibians are held in zoos and in stations. And here we also must change the situation. I come back to that later, or now. So then Corona crisis came, and many students could not find topics for their thesis because they could not go to the labs because they were closed. And in the COVID crisis, we had the idea to go for system analysis. That means students can do this analysis at home to get a degree. And that means to look for the gaps in conservation. For example, Marie Schikowski, she did an analysis of amphibians in Vietnam, and she checked how many of the Vietnamese species of amphibians are existing, and how many of them are threatened, how many of them are microendemics, and she developed this map. And that shows here in the Central Highlands, there are 26 endemic amphibian species, only here in the Central Highlands. And lastly, a colleague in Vietnam from a station asked me, hey, Thomas, we have built a station for rearing threatened species. What do you recommend? A threatened turtle from China? I said, no, stay with species in your country. But this means the colleagues don't know inside. And if we on this side publish such papers, this is something like a roadmap for the colleagues in there to which species to go first. And those colleagues in museums, in universities and stations in here could go for these species first because they are the only one, because they are in their region of habitat. Then we also did protected area coverage analysis. How many of the threatened taxa and the microendemic taxa are already covered by a protected area and which not? And then we have a political reason to go for the creation for a habitat for these species. And this recently has been published in Nature Conservation and also has been shown via the media in a worldwide scale, in a media release. And this is quite important to help to fill the gaps in conservation before it's too late. And in addition, those students also do zoo database analysis. For example, ZIMS, Zoological Information and Management System, where all the zoos in a worldwide scale type in their data, and we can check and analyze that and find out which threatened species are already in zoos and which not. Coming back to the freshwater fishes of Madagascar, we did that some years ago and published that in the US in Zoo Biology. And these are the threatened freshwater Malagasy fishes occurring in zoos. And you see which one are lacking, which one are already there. You see which one are kept in too high numbers, and you see which one are kept in too low numbers. And this is exactly what we need to change the system if we want to approach, and I like to coin that term, if we want to approach towards a conservation zoo, doing conservation work. And we also did that recently for Malagasy amphibians and reptiles. That was just published also together with Angelica Crotini, and here Frank Laff, also a quite famous name in terms of herpetofauna of Madagascar, to show which amphibians and reptiles are already in zoos and which not. And ZIMS themselves had interest to show that, and they did a media release about how we use ZIMS. Normally ZIMS is used, okay, I'm in need of a male of that species or a female of that species, which zoos have that and which can I ask? And we use that for system analysis for conservation. And ZIMS made a media release, and that reached 26,000 subscribers, and not only in the world of zoos, but also in the world of conservation, so also to the IUCN. And that's quite important because we want to spread that more so that all the zoos or most of the zoos get aware of that and that they can play an important role in conservation. Okay, I mentioned one plan approach is ex situ and in situ, and that the ark has to go to land. This is why we also have to invest in the countries of origin. And this year, together with my project partners from Laos and from Vietnam, we could rediscover the Siamese crocodile in Laos, in Cam Ranh province, where it was already believed to be extinct. And that finally was the reason that a nature reserve has been created. So only because of our research, so that's quite nice. This is the one plan approach, the in situ component. And simultaneously, again, ex situ, but connected to in situ. Together with my section keeper, Anna, we went to the zoos in Hanoi, in Ho Chi Minh City, and in Laos to capture the Siamese crocodile because most of them were believed to be hybrids with saltwater and Cuban crocodiles and not able for release or reintroduction. So we captured them, we sexed them, and we marked them and transponded them, and we took a genetic sample to check which one of them is pure or not. And in the end, the dark black ones all revealed to be pure. So there were more pure among them than we previously had thought. And they now are ready for conservation breeding for release. And a few weeks ago, the first couple had the first young. So the plan is going on. And the next will be to release young Siamese crocodile to the areas where they formerly have existing. And in Corona crisis, we even developed a cooperation with Iran. Yeah, although I have never met these guys, they approached me last year. We had the Zoo Species of the Year campaign, the crocodile, and in the frame of this campaign, I was approached by Iranian colleagues, and we already could collect money, and we could publish papers together. This time for the conservation of marsh crocodile, which maybe is something distinct in Iran. And where we also did conservation work, and this is an ex situ conservation breeding facility in Iran. So that's a positive aspect of Corona. You cannot travel that often than before, at least me. I have not been in Vietnam for the last 3 years, but meanwhile, everything is going through WhatsApp, voice records, Zoom, email. So the world has become, Angelica, we talked about that yesterday, very small in terms of research and conservation. And this is also a nice slide, a paper where Madagascar and Vietnam came together because the Madagascar group, Angelica, Franco, Karen Freeman, they wanted to know from where the invasive Asian common toad came originally. And in fact, it has been our samples from the Saigon Zoo in Ho Chi Minh City, which has been the origin of the spread of the invasion of the Asian common toad in Madagascar. Yeah, in fact, for me, research in the tropics started in 1997, 25 years ago. That was an adventurous time living with a tent in the forest. That time is over now. But yeah, that was the beginning of this network we have developed in Vietnam, and so far more than 130 species have been described. Beautiful mossy frogs, beautiful snakes, my first and so far only new species of turtle, a soft-shell turtle. And meanwhile, it's more important that that work is continued by students because there are more, there are many, they are young, and they are inside. It's easier that they work in the field than me going to Vietnam. It's complicated, it costs money. And this is Hai, who is doing his PhD about tiger geckos. And this, the Katba tiger gecko, yeah, in 2007, I was able to discover this species myself on the Katba Island, which is in front of the Halong Bay, which is a touristic site in northern Vietnam. And after discovery, Hai did the population analysis and could commit for that species being included in the appendices of the ICN and also of the CITES. And quite interestingly, also recently, the UNESCO asked me for being a desktop reviewer because that island now is evaluated becoming a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this shows how cool the work of a zoo curator can be and how much conservation can be performed through zoos. And yeah, yesterday we already heard a very nice presentation about species distribution modeling. And we also do that in Vietnam. Here, for example, for the Hulian tiger gecko, because it was already mentioned yesterday, because we can find new populations, overlooked populations, and then to formally protect them. But it's also important for release events if we want to check the suitability of a habitat in terms of climate change. And this is our cooperation with the station, the Melin station in the north, where we keep and breed the Vietnamese crocodile lizard. And this is a facility we have built in the south of Vietnam with wildlife at risk, war. And we also do environmental training. So that's an environmental education exhibit in the Melin station to show the young generation that conservation is important, and maybe we can prevent that way that they also think the rice wine with animals inside. And this is the Vietnamese crocodile lizard, previously known only from China. We could discover that in Vietnam in 2003, and these are the habitats looking like destroyed. It's the fate of them that they live in those areas in North Vietnam which have the highest coal richness, so they are really going to be extinct, so it's quite difficult. So this is why we also go for conservation breeding, that we at least have them. And first it was a sensation that the population from Vietnam was discovered as a distinct conservation unit. And meanwhile, the sensation is that in China, there are 3 different clades. So that really shows research is absolutely important for conservation breeding work if we want to do it properly. These are the 3 populations in China and that one in Vietnam. And this is a conservation breeding facility we could build up in the Cologne Zoo. That's the first ever born juvenile in Cologne Zoo, and this is the first F2. And this is our breeding couple. Orange Bird now is grandfather, and he has 12 grandchildren. And this is Mona van Schingen Khan, and she did her bachelor, master, and PhD thesis in the group. And we are quite happy that she's now working in our Federal Agency for Nature Conservation, and she's representing Germany in terms of international conservation. So that's the conservation network growing and growing. We also do eDNA work. This is a very beautiful blue and yellow colored individual. And this occasion to say that our thoughts are with the colleagues in the Ukraine, and we also do climate change research here with a backpack system to show where is the climate niche of this lizard. And I can say it's very, very tiny, and that species also is affected by the climate crisis. And we also do forensic work supported in this case by our Ministry of Environment together with Traffic and WWF to find out, can traded individuals be allocated, whether they are captive bred or wild caught. And we could show with isotopic analysis this is possible because they have different food niches in the wild and in the terrarium. So this is a help for our custom. And this is the next species at the next COP of CITES, which will be discussed to be included in the appendices of CITES, the Asian water dragon, and this to show that we cooperate with our authorities. This is again the Mitchell's monitor lizard I showed in the first slide. And this is a species which is critically endangered, and populations in Australia, meanwhile, have a decline of 97% because of the introduced cane toad. And this can show how quickly the situation can change in the habitat. And in these cases, it's very important to have ex situ populations to be able to help. And yesterday, our 13th young Mitchell's monitor hatched off the egg. So at least we already have a substantial ex situ population now in Cologne based on the takeover of this confiscated group. This is the rarest turtle in Vietnam. Yeah, actually extinct, virtually extinct in the wild. And we help to identify confiscated individuals by molecular means to know whether they are pure or not, to release them. And the Asian Turtle Program already has plans to found new reserves where they finally can be released, and that a few days ago has also been highlighted in Oryx. That's the Burmese-star tortoise, which came in a confiscation to us in 2011. We could breed it for the first time in a zoo in Germany, and then a start book could be built. And you know, in Myanmar there are political unrest, and this is why zoos abroad are important, and not only in the country of origin. In times of political unrest, if there are disease outbreaks or natural catastrophes, zoos abroad can be of ultimate importance. And coming back to this new discovery of the soft-shelled turtle, the spotted soft-shelled turtle with those dark spots on the belly, which I first found in 1997, that recently revealed to be a new species described as Uwe Fritz and Balázs Farkas. It took a long time until we could implement the genetic data sets and analyze them. But then the question arose, is this species still extinct or already eaten and collected for the trade? And that was also the WWF interested in. And with money from the European Union of Aquarium Curators, our team checked the markets in Vietnam on the search of this spotted softshell, other softshells with spots under the belly, and we found some. We did the genetical check, and some of them, in fact, were pure, so we could build up a station and bring the animals to there, and finally they bred. So that's the one plan approach in Vietnam. We already could collect them, genetically identify them, and breed them, and now can release them to the wild and give to other stations and zoos. And this is how the conservation breeding network grows. And this again, how important genetics is. We need a calibration based on wild individuals, and then we can include confiscated ones to see where are they from. This is our geneticist from Hanoi and New York, Professor Dr. Min Lee, and he found out that there is a third genetic lineage of that species, the four-eyed turtle, and this also shows the importance of genetics in the release of animals, because if we would release this population in here, that would not only be genetic pollution, they also would die, because here in the north of Vietnam, the winters are quite hard and the populations from here could not survive in there. So this is why genetics is such important. And also in zoo collections is important, because that's a tegu from South America. If we check the tegu population in all the zoos in the world, they keep only one species. Tupinambis teguixine, described 1758 by Caroli Linné, and meanwhile 7 new species have been described. So that's a big chance, or no one has taken care for. And we could find out the one we kept, that was Tupinambis cryptus, just recently described. It was nice for Cologne Zoo because it was the first breeding on a worldwide scale. But I'm sure there are more in zoo collections, but only wrongly identified. So it's also important to do genetic research in zoos. And here a confiscation of monitor lizards from the Philippines, black-headed, yellow-headed, and also in here genetics help to allocate them. And now we have published a molecular tree with megavensis, and future confiscations then can easily be allocated and decided whether individuals are sent back or used for a conservation breeding program. Here it was decided that a conservation breeding program in Zagreb Zoo in Croatia was built for that species of Philippine monitor lizard, before not reported from any collection in Europe. Beautiful species. And here also jeweled geckos from New Zealand, which we have helped to take over from a confiscation and sent back to New Zealand. And this is a thanks letter of the Minister of Environment from New Zealand saying thanks. This is what modern zoos can do for conservation. And that's the last story, the Philippine crocodile, which we keep the stud book at the Cologne Zoo for Europe. We started with 15 individuals, now we have 50. We could double the number of institutions, so quite successful. And every institution every year gives a donation of €1,500 to the Mabubaya Foundation in the north, where conservation programs for Philippine crocodiles are implemented. So quite nice story. And in the Cologne Zoo, we had the first breeding in 2013. And we also did a number of student theses and research because that species is difficult to observe and to study in the wild. And in 2015, we had first natural breeding, which means we have left the young together with the mother because they are then perfectly socialized in case you want to reintroduce them to the wild. And that was also the reason why the Philippine colleagues decided to take our individuals being sent back to the Philippines, because we also did the genetical screening, because in the Philippines, in the farms, it came out that there were hybrids with saltwater crocodiles. So the conservation breeding group from Europe really came to the first line of conservation because they were genetically screened and perfectly socialized. And finally, Halki and Dodong could be sent back to the Philippines, the welcome ceremony in the Philippines. And this is the project of CPPI Crocodilus porosus Philippines Inc., where the individuals have been released. This is Dodong and Halki, they are doing well. And this is another drawing made by Christian Niggemann, also to show the children what conservation is based on this comic. This is the Cologne Cathedral, this is the Philippine flag, and that's also on a banknote which children can buy in the Cologne Zoo shop. And also in the Philippines, they made a TV documentation about that. So it's not only that we find it important, it's also really esteemed on the Philippine side. And it's also highlighted on the homepage of the IUCN on Reverse the Rat, because if you send back enough individuals, you can reduce a threat status because you build up a population. And this is why the Philippine crocodile is listed as success story on the Reverse the Rat homepage. And this is the shortened documentation of the TV documentation from the Philippines. And this is the natural breeding. It's only 3 minutes. Franco, do we have time for 3 minutes clip? It's the last one, then only 2 more slides and it's done. It's okay? A short clip, maybe, about this second natural breeding. Oh. very happy that we have the Philippine partners, but the Philippine partners are also happy that they have us, because it can only work out together. That's the one plan approach. And these are the next young, the second natural reproduction, and they will be sent back to the Philippines at the end of the year. And you already saw this poster, Zoo Species of the Year 2021. And based on these video clips, we got an enormous sum. That was the most successful campaign ever. We have received 160,000 euro only for crocodile conservation. And this is another important component, what zoos can do for their partner inside, collecting money for conservation. And 1/3 of this money will be sent to the Philippines for building a station for the next release projects. And this is what I wanted to tell you, and what was also recognized in the newspapers in Cologne. And I was very happy about that, because it shows here on the big page, we can be an ark. This is Laura, the student who performed the study on freshwater fishes from Madagascar. And zoos can be 100% conservation. Zoos are not 100% conservation, but they have the potential to go for that. And that's what I wanted to tell you. And I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for the very beautiful and almost incredible presentation, because you showed how zoos, zoological gardens can do for conservation. It is something that it is sometimes difficult to appreciate. And I would say that here in Italy it is not so much like this for several reasons. But as you said, there is the potential for this. Grazie Thomas per la presentazione. Ci sarebbero secondo me da fare tantissime domande. Non so se abbiamo tempo. Non abbiamo tempo, dice Massimo. 1 minuto, ma e poi dopo, durante il coffee break, credo che possiamo assalire proprio Thomas e chiedergli tante cose. Io dico solo una cosa, appunto, è bello vedere queste storie in Germania, dove fanno tantissime di queste cose qua, ed è bello anche vedere progetti che riguardano anfibi e rettili, cosa che non è così semplice, ma probabilmente c'è tutto un background anche culturale della Germania su questo aspetto, cioè quindi zoo e studi su anfibi e rettili, e potremmo discuterne a lungo, come anche il fatto zoo di Colonia. Non dimentichiamolo, Cologne Zoo is an urban zoo, is within the town, è all'interno della città, cosa che è sempre più difficile trovare, almeno in Italia quasi non ci sono più zoo di questo genere. There are no more zoos like this in Italy. Thank you very much. If you have some one question, and otherwise later during the coffee break. Nessuna domanda? At least one. No. Coffee. Okay. Thank you very much again, Thomas. It was a pleasure for all the society to have you here.